Hello, and welcome back to the Data Analytics Leadership Forum. My name is Jess Baza with the Argyle Group. A couple of quick notes before I turn things over to today's presenters. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Sponsor booths are accessible from the main agenda page for this event. We encourage you to ask questions during today's session. To do so, simply click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to today's featured speakers from Kansas Solutions. We're excited to have Ashok and Erica joining us today. We'd also like to thank Jedox for their partnership with today's session. We are pleased to have today's speakers with us for their session navigating through supply chain disruptions by using data and analytics. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Ashok to introduce himself. Welcome, Ashok, and over to you.
Thank you, Jess. Good day, everyone. This is Ashok Marla, founder and CEO of Kansas Solutions. I have over 18 years of industry experience implementing S&OP solutions worldwide. Currently, I'm based out of Netherlands and looking forward to a great session today. Over to you, Erica.
Thanks, Ashok. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the presentation today. I'm the Director of Business Development and Operations at Kansas Solutions here in North America. I've been a supply chain consultant for several decades, actually, and so we'd like to talk to you about how to navigate through supply chain disruptions. A long, long time ago, back in 2019, if everybody can remember back that far when things were somewhat normal, we all developed our 2020 budgets. So we used a vast amount of historical data to predict the future. We used EPM, the Enterprise Performance Management System. We used our ERP system, the Enterprise Resource Planning data, and we spent a lot of time doing data analytics of historical patterns that helped us to start our forecast. In general, sales patterns in the past are considered to be a really good indicator of future demand patterns. So many people use that as a starting point. And this is what happened in 2019 for most companies. After a lot of integration and analysis, we came up with a really good plan for our stakeholders. We felt good about it. We knew we were going to sleep well in 2020. We're going to sleep like babies. And then reality hit. Our forecasts virtually were out the door, out the window. 2020 hit us like a train. We had to totally realign with reality, and many companies really had a tough time with this. Disruptions are a normal occurrence in industry, so we are used to disruptions on a small scale. So we have competitors that start up competing products, like, for example, the introduction of the electric car all of a sudden disrupted the demand for traditional vehicles. E-commerce has had a huge impact on traditional retail. Dell got hit hard by leading-edge technology that they were having a really tough time catching up with. So disruptions are normal in industry, but the problem in 2020 was that disruptions were on steroids. We got hit from every angle. We got hit from the demand side. We got hit from the supply side. So in the demand side, for example, we hit shutdown of our suppliers. We had ill employees. School closures caused employee absences. So our whole demand structure was totally our supply was totally impacted. We had shortage of raw materials. We had shortage of manpower, and our production levels went down. At the same time, and this is where we got hit in every direction, at the same time, our demand went very radically changed. So it changed for some positively and for some negatively. In some cases, it forced layoffs. Many companies had to actually close their doors. In some cases, though, the demand did go up. Like, for example, Lysol wipes are still on back order. There was a big run on toilet paper, hand sanitizer, cleaning products. So in many ways, there was a huge disruption on the supply side and the demand side. But some companies flourished. So what we want to do is look at all the different things that they did differently. What was it that made them flourish? I'm going to pass this over to Ashok so he can give us some background before I get into some examples.
Thank you, Erica. I think before we look at how data analytics and connected planning platforms can help us navigate through the supply chain disruptions, we will look at some case studies, but I think it's also good to understand the journey so far. How did SNOP evolve over time? And since Oliver White pioneered this concept, almost 50 years ago, it had a lot of attention. In the early 2000s, companies had some level of demand-supply collaboration. A lot of Excel spreadsheets with plans were being exchanged. Also on the manufacturing side, quite a few concepts evolved. The way we manage suppliers, the way we manage inventory, concepts like lean, just-in-time inventory, all of these things have evolved. But still, what has happened is, they were not fully integrated systems. The demand and supply across the organizations not fully integrated. So they had their own bit of challenges when it comes to, when there is a promotion that is created, it had an impact on the supplier side, not knowing that, there will be spike in demand, or when there was a supplier facility shut down unexpectedly, the sales guys had no clue about it. Right. So even though there was a bit of demand and supply balancing, orchestration, it wasn't foolproof. So there were still a lot of those issues. And one example that comes to my mind, I was working for Dell at that time. They introduced this colored skin for the laptops. All of a sudden, that was a big hit in the market. But one of the suppliers who was supplying that colored back panel was having technical challenges. Now, the sales guys had no clue. They were just going full force trying to sell. And then, we had a huge demand, and whoever logged on to Dell.com site, used to see that their deliveries were delayed quite significantly. But if there was that kind of orchestration that time, it would have really helped them do kind of adjustment in their marketing campaigns and things like that. That's how it was in the 2000s. But if we look at, there was a shift that happened in late 2000s, and that has helped in building, collaborative platforms. People started looking at, okay, there are different departments in the organization, different departments have their plans, how do we integrate them? Right, so the concepts of integrated business planning, collaborative planning have come in. A lot of new tools have appeared in the market, which are cloud-based, in-memory processing, so we don't have the constraints of technology anymore. Tools like Xerox, which is sponsoring us today. So these tools help replace a lot of these Excel sheets. So all the planning that was happening in Excel sheets completely moved to these collaborative planning tools. So no longer planning was happening in silos, it is no longer just based on these Excel sheets that were getting exchanged from one department to other department. Now everybody gets a collective view. And at the same time, if you look at in the market, what we have observed is product life cycles have shrunk, and then there is increased pressure on all heads of supply chains to keep their inventory carrying costs low, to be just in time. Customer satisfaction levels should always be maintained at 99.9%. So, concepts of lean, concepts of agility, they have become very, very important. So that's how SNOP has shifted. There are tools, people are no longer relying on canned reports, but they're focusing more on dynamic analysis. So we will look at how certain businesses have shifted, adopted, these concepts. But before we get there, I think it is also good to reflect on, based on our collective experience, what is happening in the market. So over to you, Erica, for the next slide.
Erica, this is our first poll of the day. I'm not sure if you wanted me to run it or if you want to run it as well, but we'll ask attendees to share their thoughts here before we take a look at the results.
Sure. So the question is, the poll we'd like to do is, roughly what percentage of your businesses were able to successfully and quickly pivot their standard process or product to a new one due to the pandemic? So this could involve your industry itself or your company, or it could be your customers. Just a rough idea of how quickly and successfully companies that you work with were able to pivot. And then after we get the results of this, we'll go through a few examples of companies that we found that navigated through the disrupted supply chain quite well. I'll give you a few minutes to answer the questions. We're going to show some evidence once I get the feedback here. We'll show some evidence that shows the traditional sales and operations planning tools, how they were used differently to minimize the impact of these disruptions. And I'll wait for Jess to let me know if we're ready to go on the poll results.
Absolutely, Erica, all set. Feel free to advance the results when you're ready.
Thank you. So actually, this is a much higher number than I expected to see. This is great news. It looks like 25 to 50% pivoted quite quickly, and 75%, 31% of the people said that 75% of their associating organizations were able to pivot quickly. So that's really good news. That leads us into the next few slides that give us examples of companies that we have found that did the same. The first one I looked at was Pernod Ricard. They're a manufacturer of wine, spirits, and non-alcoholic beverages. The wine and spirits portion is where they had a lot of excess alcohol because they had now a huge shift in their demand for wines and spirits. So there was a closing down of bars, sporting events, weddings, celebrations. That put a huge dent on the demand. And so all of a sudden they had an excess of alcohol in the form of ethanol. With the onset of the pandemic, of course, there was a huge demand for disinfectants and hand sanitizers, which, you guessed it, require alcohol. Pernod Ricard immediately jumped on this new source of demand as soon as they saw it, and they realized that, they've got this glut of alcohol and they've got this need out in the community. They quickly jumped onto that pivot. They demonstrated the production agility by moving to the production of something that they normally make a big effort to be safely consumed to something that should not be consumed at all. So this is a major shift in their thinking. Again, this would be their agility in their thought process of where their direction is going. They use their centralized database of contacts like suppliers, their marketing connections, to source the other key ingredients needed for hand sanitizers. They also use their distribution database to determine which of their distilleries, they had many distilleries all over the country, and they wanted to know which distilleries would be able to handle the large industrial quantities of hand gel, where their logistics teams can get it to market. And using data analytics of their existing data, they became very successful at making hand sanitizer in a very short period of time. The next example we saw very early on in the pandemic was Bauer Hockey. So one of the design engineers, Dan Bourgeois, he commented that the night the NHL closed, our business went from super successful to zero. So for those that are not too close to the hockey world, you need to understand that in NHL, players get many helmets each year, a very steady demand just from professional players, never mind the thousands of players in the lower leagues. So Bauer had to come up with, they realized that the demand for helmets have plummeted. And at the same time, they knew that they wanted to keep their manufacturing plants from closing. They didn't want to lose their workforce. So they had to come up with a new source of revenue and a new source of production to make up for this loss. Of course, the pandemic provided this. Healthcare professionals were in dire need of protection. So what Bauer did was they modified their production line to make full-face, single-use visors that were protective gear for medical staff and first responders. So I thought that was a pretty fantastic shift for somebody that was always focused on hockey and hockey protection. Now all of a sudden they were looking at medical protection. So what was it that actually helped them pivot? Well, they already had the process in place to make the protective sports visors. They just needed to pivot slightly to adjust their process for shields designed to protect against virus transmission. So again, they used their agile distribution network to create a new route to market. They used centralized distribution and logistical data, and that provided the ability to do effective data analytics, which helped them to make the quick switch. The third one was a local company, Battlefield International Incorporated. And Battlefield is actually, they are an engineering company focusing mostly on large military contracts. They make parts for military unmanned aerial vehicles and tanks. So they generally receive requests for new products on a regular basis. So getting a new request, a new product design requirement was really nothing new to them. They're already very agile in their design capability. And this agility in their design capability is what helped them to solve a large COVID problem. There was a huge demand for ventilators all of a sudden, but a shortage of medical staff required to keep them functioning. So they have to be continually pumped manually. So this pivot was difficult only because they knew nothing about this medical device. So they had to do a lot of investigating, a lot of meetings with the medical folks, looking at all the different requirements, the restrictions that they had to withhold that were normally not in their normal production efforts. And with their very open attitude to change, and I think that's pretty key, they were very open to change. Their attitude was even agile. And a supplier database that was available to all employees for collaborative analytics. And again, that was key because everybody had access to the same information instead of silos at each workstation. The company was able to see all that data, get to the source of the components that they needed very quickly. And they ended up developing something called the MVAC, the Manual Ventilator Automation Control. And it helps to keep the pumps, the ventilator pumps moving automatically. This was something that the owner was telling me that it's not something that they were hoping to make any profit of at all, because he was really truly hoping that he would never have to sell any of these, which would mean that we would have things under control as far as the pandemic goes. But what I thought was very interesting here, I saw Dr. Priyadarshi's session this morning, and he had talked about future-proofing the organization using FACT, F-A-C-T. And two of the things in the FACT acronym, the A is agile and adaptable for true digital transformation, and C is changing mindset and talent transformation. Now, the F and the T also are data focused, which you see that all of these examples that I showed you were very focused on centralized data and analytics of that data in a collaborative form. But I also thought it was interesting that the A and the C, the agile and the changing mindset, were also critical to these moves. Ashok, I'll pass it back to you.
Yep. So now, how does analytics help as an SNOP enabler, right? So I think looking at the experience, analytics helped the SNOP adoption and maturity in a very big way. Analytics acts like the routine health check of the supply chain, right? So, it helps us understand historically what happened. It helps us understand how we are doing today. Because there are so many plans floating around again in the organization, not everybody has time to look at every plan, we look at certain key performance indicators, KPIs or metrics, or we have exception dashboards, which highlight how our supply chains are performing. And those are the things that we want to look at. So analytics helps us get that hindsight. Analytics helps us get the insight and foresight, right? So if you look at the hindsight, businesses are transforming at a rapid pace. We don't have enough time to look at historical data. That might actually cause us to make the same mistakes again and again. But what is important is if we have tools in place, we have metrics in place that can quickly interpret, give us some conclusions and lessons with least amount of effort, which we can incorporate in all our future planning. So that's where hindsight comes into play significantly in S&OP. Right? Insight is what is happening on a day-to-day basis. The operational aspects of our plans, like are there disruptions? What are the signals that we can pick up? Now, again, the key is, these days, vast amount of data is getting generated across the businesses, right? But, we need to understand what data is most relevant for us and how we can extract actionable intelligence out of it. Again, there are various tools in the marketplace that are helping us navigate through, loads of data and pick up that actionable intelligence. Foresight, again, everybody wants to make sure that the plans are grounded, they are realistic, but at the same time, they are also aligned to our business aspirations. Everybody wants to have a growth strategy. Now, how do we make sure that we are listening to the market? At the same time, we are also driving our own business strategy. So that's where collaborative planning becomes very key, and tools like Xerox will really help us set up those kind of plans, to have a successful S&OP strategy developed. So all in all, if we want to have a good S&OP, then data analytics coupled with true collaboration will help us in setting up a good S&OP system and quick decision making, which is data driven. Then the other key aspect, we looked at how data analytics can help, but also there is other big dilemma, right? Do we focus on lean or do we focus on agility of the supply chains? Which one is important? Well, the good news is we actually can focus on both. We can optimize our supply chains for both of them, right? So how is it possible? Let us look at, we need to first understand that one size does not fit all, right? Similarly, one supply chain execution strategy does not fit all product types, all customer segments. We need to be able to apply relevant strategies that are cost effective, that can take care of customer service levels, business needs, or, whatever are our business criteria that we have, what are our business objectives. They need to take care of them. And at the same time, they should all work in an orchestrated way, because we are talking about within the same organization, how can we apply supply chain segmentation, apply different strategies, right? For example, in an organization, say you're manufacturing mobile phones. That's your core product, but you also need packaging material for it. You need, documentation, power cables, which are, or small nuts and bolts. Now, do we apply the same supply chain principles like the way we apply for a mobile phone manufacturer, which is our key finished good, or can we have some other strategy, right? So we can just look at certain characteristics. One example I show on the slide here, just by looking at demand characteristics and supply characteristics. If we have more predictable demand with shorter lead times, well, that's easy to manage because you can always go for something like min-max planning. Whenever you're hitting your low levels of inventory, you place an order to replenish. But when you have unpredictable demand, but you have shorter lead time, so you know that your suppliers are going to give you the material in shortest possible time, then you could go for a build-to-order strategy. wherein, as and when the order comes, you ask your supplier to quickly manufacture and send it to you. You can also consider having safety stock levels just to ensure that, your customer service levels are always met. But what do you do when, your demand is unpredictable and you have longer supply lead times? Well, then the best case is postponement strategy, where you still build to order, but you make sure that, your customer is aware that, this is unpredictable demand and it is going to take longer lead time. And, if they are, high-end printers like industrial printers, for example, then probably it's not worth doing a safety stock. It is worth to actually configure them or build them to the order. Whereas if we have predictable demand but a longer lead time, we know that we are going to sell, our forecast accuracies are good, then it makes sense for us to actually go ahead and use a lean strategy where we can also build to stock based on our forecast levels. So a strategy, a good S&OP strategy coupled with analytics, with the support of IT systems, I think that's the recipe for success to manage the disruption. Sorry, I think we just...
Yep. Thanks, Ashok.
Yeah, over to you. Yep.
Thank you. So in conclusion, just the data analytics, the mass amount of data that we need to use that to catch disruptions before they disrupt the business. We've got a final poll question here. Do you feel that your company has made enough changes since the onset of the pandemic to withstand the next major disruption successfully? I'll give you a few seconds for this. Whether you feel confident in your ability, not at all comfortable, some changes have been made, or you're not sure. And some changes have been made, but I don't feel we're ready. That's actually a very that's actually the expected response at this point in time. If we can at all help, we'd be happy to do a free S&OP health check. We'd love to talk to you if we could help you with that. In the meantime, we're going to leave you with a Dilbert. A few Dilbert comics here, actually. Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Erica and Ashok. We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to touch base on this important topic today. I would encourage our attendees to continue to submit your topic questions. It looks like we might have just gotten one. I'm seeing here in the chat. Erica, maybe we can read this out before we close out. I think we've got about 2 minutes left. So this question says, how can S&OP planning tools help data teams better determine which data sets should be analyzed to increase revenue and performance? Any thoughts on that question there?
Ashok, I do have an answer,
Yes.
But I'm going to let you take this one because you were more focused on this topic.
Sure. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, I think which data helps. I think, again, it boils down to the KPIs that we set for organizations. Forecast accuracy can be one, order turn rate could be one, inventory carrying costs. So all of these have an impact on the overall performance of the organization. And, for example, if we are having, significant lag in order fulfillment, that has an impact on revenue. So there are different KPIs, and I think the key aspect is when we talk about S&OP, it's integrating our fulfillment channels with our financial information. So we need to clearly understand if we are stocking inventory at a warehouse, how much is that inventory carrying cost? The system should be able to compute them real time and show it up on the dashboard. So there are different KPIs that can be set up that really help us understand what's the direct impact on our revenue.
And if I could
Erica,
just
if you want to add anything?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Ashok. The one thing a couple of things that we've done with the JetOx product, we very highly use data segmentation so that we can zero in on exactly what is going to help us make those kind of decisions. And also, using data segmentation, we can do all sorts of simulation runs. So we do simulations, what if analysis, if we change this, if we do that in this particular market segment, what happens? Those are a couple of things that we use extensively with the JetOx product.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you so much, Ashok, for a really great session today. I think that's a really nice way to close out. Again, any additional questions for Ashok or Erica, please do continue to submit those, and we'll be sure to share them with their team following today's session. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic session. We've had a few of you ask, so friendly reminder, today's leadership presentation, along with all of today's sessions, will be available on demand for the following week. Our next session will begin shortly at 2:55 Eastern and will be a fireside chat titled AI and Analytics, Smarter, Faster, Scalable Measures to Improve Business Intelligence. Your browser will automatically redirect you to the next session. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.